I'm nervous. Hey, is this computer on mute?
Yeah. Oh, I don't know, actually. That's a good question. I don't know how to... Good call. Why is... Is there any chance there?
Do you want everybody to grab their seats?
Just, I need like 2 minutes.
No, why?
Because the internet is so crappy here. It's so crappy that it's not... Okay, no, we're good. We're good. We're good. We're good. We're good.
Okay, we're going to sneak by you one more time.
Okay, they can hear me. So this does nothing.
Hey everyone, just want to let you know we have about 2 to 3 minutes here, so please take your seats if you haven't already.
It's just super, it's super bad.
Yeah.
So
Wow, that's weird. Because they realize it's so technical. Oh, I'm just
Hello, everybody. Good evening. My name is Aaron Pollock, and on behalf of the Progressive Conservative Youth of Alberta, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to the Edmonton PCYA Leaders Debates. It's been a long, crazy summer, and there's been so much excitement leading up to tonight's event that it's starting to feel like we're about to witness Rocky Balboa take on Clubber Lang. I'm hoping that the only hits we see on stage tonight are of the figurative variety. There's no doubt that we're about to witness a showdown of three all-Albertan heavyweights, all vying for the ultimate title. Leader of the PC Party and Premier of Alberta. It's plain to see that these gentlemen have been working tirelessly all summer, but there have also been a group of young, inspired, and very passionate individuals that have been working very hard to make tonight's debate happen. I'm talking, of course, about the PCYA, an organization of which I'm extremely proud. Speaking from personal experience, it can be tough to stay engaged in an age when one's also concerned about getting to class on time and getting a summer job. It's an age where it can be easy to overlook the fact that many of the choices we consider to be small now are merely footsteps down one of the many divergent pathways of our future. As an organization, we aim to provide youth an opportunity to be part of this decision-making process, but we will be the ones most affected by how we tread these paths now. Active across all of Alberta, the PCYA provides youth with political and community engagement and opportunities to be involved with volunteering and mentorship. On top of that, we're a group of friends that likes to hang out and talk politics. Although you're probably quite familiar with them already, it's also my honor to introduce the three gentlemen on stage with me tonight. First up, we have a man who wears his heart in his sleeve and undoubtedly has the best hair in all of legislature. You know what I'm talking about. Having immigrated to Canada from communist Poland, he's worked his way up from being a social studies teacher to holding several distinguished portfolios and serving as deputy premier, Mr. Thomas Lukaszuk. Next up, we have a man who's been a coal miner, a federal cabinet minister, and representative of Alberta on the national stage, and who served as executive vice president of CIBC. The man who inspired the hashtag Selfie with Jim, Mr. Jim Prentice. Last but certainly not least, a man who served as an alderman, an AUMA board member, Minister of Transportation, and Minister of Infrastructure. The man I've come to think of as the Sheriff, Mr. Ric McIver. Lastly, I'd like to introduce our lovely moderator for the evening, currently completing the final year of her political science degree at the University of Alberta. She's also editor-in-chief of The Wanderer Online, co-chair of the Alberta Not-for-Profit Case Competition at the U of A School of Business, and leading undergraduate research initiative project. Ladies and gentlemen, the lovely Miss Blue Knox. One more shout out as well to the incredibly talented and dedicated and hardworking Mr. Dan Rose for spearheading this event tonight. Dan, you could have done it without you, so thank you so much for all your hard work. Before passing it over to Blue, I would like to kindly remind everyone to turn their phones on silent and please do not interrupt the debate as we are limited on time. In the case of any continued disruptions to the proceedings, we'll be calling our lovely friends over in the security department. So on behalf of the PCYA, thank you so much for coming out, and in the words of Michael Buffer, let's get ready to rumble.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for that introduction, Aaron. As Aaron said, I will be moderating the debate this evening. I will start by introducing the format so everyone is familiar how we will proceed. The format for this evening's debate will be as follows. Each candidate will give 2-minute opening statements. There will then be a series of questions which have been prepared by the PCYA, followed by a series of questions from the audience. With every question asked, candidates will give an initial 1-minute response. Then they will face off against one another, debating back and forth for 30 seconds each, totaling 1 minute per pair. There will be 3 pairs per question, and pairs will rotate with each question to ensure fairness. At the end of this debate, there will also be a brief tete-a-tete where candidates will each have the opportunity to ask questions of their opponents. This debate format has been reviewed by each campaign team, as well as the PCYA, and discussed with the candidates ahead of time. We have asked each candidate to focus on the future of Alberta, keep comments professional, and stay within the time limits. I will ask you, the audience, to please use the cards that were handed out at the entrance to prepare any questions, And then, when your question is ready, at any point during the debate, please raise your placard in the air. If you do not have one and you would like one to ask a question, just raise your hand and a PCYA volunteer will find you and give you one so that you may submit a question. There are other ways to submit your questions. You may also post questions on the Facebook event page or tweet the PCYA with your question using the hashtag PCLDRDebate, PC Leader Debate. Misha Patel, my colleague from Political Science and the University of Alberta Debate Society, will be sitting in the front row here timing. She will indicate to candidates when their time is running out and will indicate when their time is up. Candidates who exceed time will be told so and, if need be, will be cut off because we are limited for time and want to ensure that each candidate gets equal time. My role as moderator is to facilitate this debate, and I will try my very best to ensure a fair and engaging debate for everyone here. With that said, let's begin with our opening statements. The order of opening and closing statements has been decided by drawing popsicle sticks. I work at the Kids with Cancer Society. So we will begin with a 2-minute opening statement from Mr. Lukaszuk. Our second statement will be from Mr. McIver, and our third will be from Mr. Prentice. As a reminder, each of you has 2 minutes once again, and best of luck to all candidates. We will begin with Mr. Lukaszuk. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. And first of all, good evening to you all, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here and hear from all three of us. But it is an important occasion because we as Albertans get to make a very critical decision. We get to pick a premier of our province that will be putting in shape on our government and definitely setting the direction of our province moving forward. And that is why it is so important that we find a person that not only has the combination of knowing the files intuitively and having the experience of working with Albertans on those files, but also a person who has the integrity and the ability to make decisions that are morally right and that are not necessarily codified decisions. No, it is very important that we find a premier in this province at a time when our party is going through some very difficult times, and government is going through difficult times, that connects with Albertans and speaks to the real issues of Albertans. We're very fortunate that this government of the past has created an opportunity for us where we get to paint the picture of what our province is going to look like into the future. We actually get to imagine and decide what kind of a province are we going to build. Are we going to build a province that we're going to be proud of into the future, that will attract and retain our young people here, that will create the economy where you can have choices of virtually any jobs you wish? Or are we going to build a work camp where people will come in to work, make a lot of money, and leave because they simply don't have the quality of life that they wish they could enjoy in this province? Those are very critical decisions that we will have to make over the next few years. And having an individual that connects with Albertans and has the ability to detect what is right from wrong intuitively, and has the ability to connect with Albertans and understand what the real issues of average Albertans are. Shortages of daycares, shortages of senior homes, and the struggles that many families have to endure in this province. That is the right person that we need for this time. We need a premier that will stand up for this province and speak for himself. We need
Thank you very much, Mr. Lukaszuk.
Thank you.
That concludes our opening statement from Mr. Lukaszuk. We will now move on to Mr. McIver. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Blue, and thank you all for being here. You could have chosen to be somewhere else, so I'm grateful you've chosen to be here with us. My name is Ric McIver, and as you know, I'm running to be the next leader of the Progressive Conservative Association of Alberta and the next premier of this great province, Alberta. And when I started my campaign, I started with the theme, common sense, new thinking to replace establishment thinking. And as the campaign goes on, I have to say I feel more strongly than ever that that was indeed the right theme. You know what, right from day one, I talked about setting the tone, setting an example from the top, saying things that, for example, senior members of my campaign team have agreed that they'll be ineligible for government contracts, and something that no one else has said yet is that companies they own will be ineligible for government contracts. I've said that those that lobby government that are registered to lobby government should be ineligible for government contracts, and I've said that the rules are good and they're important, but values are more important. Just because something's not against the rules doesn't make it right. These are things that I think Albertans are looking to see an example of, and I think it's something that we need to demonstrate as we go forward. You know what, the things about Well, frankly, I think that we need to build up the value in our government, in our party. I think that, frankly, I believe in selling memberships for $10. I think it builds up the value in our government, in our party, and frankly, you can buy memberships, but you can't buy trust. I think that the future of this province is incredibly bright. And that's why it's important to say that, especially in a youth campaign, because the youth that are here and the youth that are watching are the future of this province. I want to make sure that the future of this province, for my kids and grandkids, and everybody, your kids and grandkids, is as great as it has been for me since I chose this province in 1981. And I very much appreciate the opportunity to compete for the leadership. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McIver. We will now move on to Mr. Prentice. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Blue. This process, ladies and gentlemen, is about whether we need new leadership for our party and for our province. And there is a stark choice to be made in the coming days, whether our next leader should be someone who sat at the cabinet table through one of the most disappointing periods in our province's history, or whether we are going to have a fresh start. Over the course of the last number of months, I presented a clear, substantive plan for our party and for our province. I've outlined my 5 priorities in great detail. Today I indicated that I would introduce a new Accountability Act that will set a higher standard for our government, because that is what Albertans are demanding everywhere I go and to all the Albertans I speak. Now, Mr. McIver, I hope tonight that you're going to tell us why you sat silently at the cabinet table, ignoring the outrage of Albertans, your so-called bosses. Why is it that you only started listening to your bosses when you saw the opportunity to become Premier, didn't speak up before that? You talk about trust. And Thomas, you were the Deputy Premier of Alberta. You were the Deputy Premier. You knew what you were seeing. You sat silently. There was no excuse. You were either complicit in what was going on, or you refused to stand up for what was right. In either event, you failed Albertans. You failed to stand up for Albertans. You were the Deputy Premier of this province through the most disappointing time in our province's history. Folks, we need new leadership. We need someone with the experience, someone with a track record, someone who's going to return us to good government. This is what Albertans are asking for in every corner of this province, and I'm asking for your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for those opening statements, candidates. We will move on to our first prepared question. Our first prepared question is as follows. Alberta's export-oriented economy is dependent on an abundance of resources. What will you do to ensure that our commodities and finished products can access global markets at a fair price? And how will you ensure that all Albertans share in this prosperity now and in the future? Our first candidate to give his 1-minute opening response is Mr. McIver. You have 1 minute.
Well, thank you. And to actually to reach out to the world with the export-based economy, I will do in the future what I've done in the past. The best predictor of future performance is past performance. Again, when I was in cabinet, I stood up, I stopped the Sky Palace, an example of when I did not sit silent. And the other things that I did is I actually successfully negotiated deals that other people thought were impossible. A deal that went outstanding 60 years with the Tsuut'ina First Nation. After almost 60 years unsuccessful, I was able to negotiate that. A deal that was unsuccessfully negotiated with the Stoney First Nation for about 30 years, I was able to successfully negotiate. In the agreement that allows the last 20 kilometers of road to be done on Highway 43 between Edmonton and Grand Prairie, went for 20 years, and I was able to successfully do that. If you're actually going to make those successful arrangements with the rest of the world, you're going to need somebody with a successful track record of doing deals that have seemed impossible, and I fortunately have that track record.
Thank you very much, candidate. Mr. Prentice, you now have 1 minute.
Thank you. Well, it's all about market access. It's all about having a bright future if, in terms of our energy, and in terms of our forestry, and in terms of our agricultural products, we're able to access global markets, because that's the only way that we are going to achieve global prices. And so the Americans have been a great market for us, a captive market for a period of time, but going forward, our future lies not just in the United States. They can be a good customer, but they can't be our only customer. And so we need to reach out into the Asia-Pacific Basin. What I intend to do about that is based on what I've done through my life. I've worked with First Nations. We need to strike a partnership with British Columbia and with coastal First Nations in British Columbia First Nations in the quarter. This is something that I've worked on over the course of my life. I know what I'm talking about, and I know exactly what we need to do. Folks, here's the important point. We will not achieve global access and global prices unless we have leadership from the Premier of Alberta, because it will be the Premier of Alberta that drives this.
Thank you, Mr. Prentice. Mr. Lukaszuk, you now have 1 minute.
Well, thank you. As important as oil and gas industry is and going to be to Alberta, we all know that there are other products that are being grown and manufactured in this province that are struggling with similar problems. Our farmers just are starting out to empty out their bins, their silos from last year's crop because they're not being serviced well by CN. We know that there can be a great deal of upgrading and refining of our agricultural products into actually completed food products, because we know that this country will be one of few countries left in the world that will be feeding the rest of the world. And we also know that our forestry industry is just as important. So when I'm going all over the province and talking about access to markets and upgrading and refining, I'm looking at the entire province and not just an oil and gas industry. Yes, we need to have a social license, and that is why we need to be very strong environmental stewards of our land in all industries, and make sure that we carry on with some of the protocols that we have signed on to, and make sure that we don't allow the future Premier to cancel our carbon levies and carbon capture and storage.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lukaszuk. I will have to ask that the audience hold on to applause until the very end of the debate, as we are limited for time, and I want to ensure that each candidate has a fair amount of time to speak. So now we will move into the rebuttal section of this debate. Our first pairing is Mr. McIver and Mr. Lukaszuk. Each candidate will have 30 seconds. I will remind you that this question is asking how our finished products and commodities can access global markets at a fair price, and how you, as our Premier, if you are successful in the election, will ensure that all Albertans share in this prosperity now and in the future. Mr. McIver, you have 30 seconds.
Good. Well, Thomas, this is a place where we differ, and I'm sure you won't mind me pointing it out, as I've said that I won't be raising the carbon levy. Right now, we actually need to compete. We need to do business with the United States, and we can't have our industry with our hands tied behind their back. Even on the environmental front, if Alberta's emissions went to zero, it wouldn't make a dent. But if we could work in concert with the U.S., even if they had reduced theirs by 5 or 10, and we went with them, it would have a much better effect. Plus, our industry would be more competitive. So I'm not for raising the carbon.
Thank you very much, Mr. McIver. Mr. Lukaszuk, 30 seconds.
Well, thank you, Rick. I appreciate it. The fact is that we are the producers. This is our environment, and our children will be living in this province. We cannot allow for Washington, D.C. to be setting our environmental standards for our province, in which our kids will be living into the future. We're the producers. We have everything on the line. We stand to lose the most.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lukaszuk and Mr. Prentice, you will now pair off for 1 minute. Mr. Lukaszuk, you have the first 30 seconds.
It's on the same topic, is it?
Yes, same question.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you very much. Well, the fact is this, that we are the producer, and our future economy and our quality of life relies on the fact that we access markets and that we have the social license to move our products abroad. We cannot afford not to meet our own self-imposed 2020 targets and jeopardize ourselves simply because we choose to allow Washington, D.C. to set our environmental standards for us, for Albertans. We're proud of our province. We're proud of our environment. This is our province for our children.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lukaszuk. I will remind the candidates that this is a question about resources and not the environment. Our next pairing is, it's still Mr. Lukaszuk and Mr. Prentice. Mr. Prentice, you have 30 seconds.
Well, I don't believe in doing what the Americans tell us. I believe in leading with the Americans. That's my record. I stood together with the Obama administration, negotiated the motor vehicle fuel emission standards that we have that have been one of the most significant carbon reduction achievements in North America. I believe that we need to work together, but we should not be increasing carbon levies, damaging our competitiveness, because every day as a province we compete with the Americans, and we can't hurt ourselves, hurt jobs and wealth and investment in Alberta.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prentice. Our next pairing is Mr. Prentice and Mr. McIver. Mr. Prentice, you have the beginning 30 seconds.
Well, I think what needs to happen on a go-forward basis is there needs to be a concerted plan led by the Premier of Alberta to reach out, to work together with Christy Clark, the Premier of British Columbia, whom I respect and who has set out certain conditions that she feels are important. We also are going to need to work together with First Nations, with coastal First Nations, with whom I have worked in the past, with whom I have negotiated important agreements, precedent-setting agreements. That is how we're going to achieve global access, And ladies and gentlemen, if we don't do it in that way, it's not going to happen.
Thank you, Mr. Prentice. Mr. McIver.
Well, thank you, Mr. Prentice. I actually named some of the agreements I made with First Nations. You did not. And in fact, you failed when you were at the Edmonton to get an agreement with BC. But I will agree with you on one thing. We need to deal with the Premier of BC. An interesting fact you may not know is my campaign manager in this contest was actually Christy Clark's. Now, that doesn't guarantee I can get an agreement, but I can probably get a meeting, which is a good start. And I will use my successful track record in other negotiations to have mutual interest with our good neighbors in BC in order to get that agreement done, and with the U.S. where necessary.
Thank you, Mr. McIver. Thank you, candidates. We will now move on to our second prepared question. This question is with concern to balancing urban expansion with rural needs. Alberta's cities are rapidly expanding. How will you, as our Premier, ensure there is responsible development of land that respects the environment as well as the interests of agricultural producers, rural Albertans, and all municipalities and counties? Candidates, you each have 1 minute to give your initial response. Mr. Prentice, you have the first minute.
Well, this is a very important question given the challenges that we faced in terms of growth in our province. I think 3 key principles I'd like to just put forward. Firstly, we need to respect private property rights. This is something that has been very contentious in our province. Property owners are extremely concerned about our record in terms of protecting property rights. Secondly, we are going to need to invest in regional infrastructure because much of the work that we need to do involves multiple municipalities working together. And thirdly, we're going to have to provide municipalities with stable funding, with consistent funding, because you cannot plan for the future. You can't build out on a regional basis, whether you're talking about transportation or water or sewer infrastructure, without stability and long-term planning and security of funding.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lukaszuk, 1 minute.
Well, thank you. First thing we need to do is slow down the review of the Municipal Government Act. I know that it is being reviewed, and I know that municipalities feel that they have not been adequately consulted and they haven't been heard. We want to make sure that their issues are brought to our attention and that they are in the Act. We need to review the funding formulas, and the funding formulas were not designed to be reflective of the sudden growth that we have right now. And we will have to make sure that we don't pit municipality against municipality. There actually has to be a win in collaboration, where collaborating gets both municipalities, both partners, a better outcome. And lastly, there has to be a due process. When we disagree, and that happens from time to time, there has to be a recourse where municipalities are satisfied that they have been heard and that there was an objective third body, third person that reviews the situation and makes rulings. We are only one province. There's only 4 million of us. We need to grow this province together, and provincial government must set the stage for that to happen.
Thank you very much. Mr. McIver, 1 minute.
Well, thank you. As the only person up here that's actually been elected municipally before, I feel comfortable with this question. And it's a land use question because you're talking about protecting agricultural product and things like that. Actually, our government has given municipalities control over land use. So we need to work in partnership with them, both directly through the AEMBNC and the AUMA board, which I sat on for 8 years, by the way, so I don't need to introduce myself to those people. And we need to find ways to make sure, to do it as a partnership. And we need to actually think about protecting them. For example, rural municipalities, if they clump together development, which is probably the most efficient way to do it environmentally, they run the risk of the people in those clumps forming a village and then losing all the tax base that they built up in the first place. So we actually need to work with them and find a way that they can build up that tax base in an environmentally friendly way without fear of losing it. We also need to work with the cities to make sure that we keep densifying and building in an efficient way. And again, I have 8 years of experience working on these issues.
Thank you very much, Mr. McIver. Our first rebuttal pairing will be Mr. Lukaszuk and Mr. Prentice. Mr. Lukaszuk, you have 30 seconds.
Well, thank you. You know, the experience comes with dealing a number of files because municipalities struggle with a number of issues, and often side by side there are conflicts. At the end of the day, we also have to keep in mind our very, very precious agricultural land. They don't make any more of that. And since we know that we will be the food basket of the world, we must be very conscientious of the fact that we cannot encroach on land that is becoming limited. But due recourse, due process, a quasi-judicial process must be in place.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lukaszuk. Mr. Prentice.
Well, certainly we need to respect private property rights. We need to protect agricultural land. There's been a very antagonistic relationship in this province between private property owners and the government. It's fair, Mr. Lukaszuk, For you now to say that you're interested in that, you want to protect agricultural land, you were the deputy premier. Why did you not speak up and stand up in defense of private property owners in this province? Why have we never heard from you on that? Why are you now interested in protecting agricultural land when you never were as deputy premier?
Thank you very much. I will remind candidates that there will be an opportunity at the very end for a tete-a-tete to ask questions of your fellow candidates if they are not addressed during this portion of the debate. The next point will be Mr. Prentice and Mr. McIver. Mr. Prentice, 30 seconds.
Well, as we go forward, much of this is about sound planning. It is about respecting jurisdiction. It is about partnerships, property rights, as I mentioned, but it's also about how we're going to build out the regional infrastructure that we need. It's how we're going to protect our environment, for example, by collaborating together amongst municipalities to have sound planning and the development of regional infrastructure, sewage infrastructure, water infrastructure, the kind of things that we need to be doing together. I think that's what I'm hearing everywhere I go in the province. That's what Alberta.
Thank you, Mr. Prentice. Mr. McIver.
Well, you know what, when it comes to getting this done, it's about working together. I can tell you, again, when I was on city council, I was able to negotiate a deal that everybody thought was impossible with with Rockyview, between Rockyview and the city, and we actually picked corridors next to the city, each one where the county would develop and one where the city would develop, and by extension, that actually saved corridors for agricultural land. So I would say I would take my track record of being successful on these types of issues from the past into the future, and as premier, I would, you can count on me to do that.
Thank you, Mr. McIver. Mr. McIver and Mr. Lukaszuk, you will be next. Mr. McIver, 30 seconds.
Yeah, and again, it's a matter of working together with people collaboratively. And we need to actually make sure that, as I said, the tax situation through our legislation that we have, and I'm going to argue with you, Thomas, because we actually need to work together with the MGA. During my time on council, we had 2 false starts with amending the MGA, and now we're into a third time, and now it's time to get it done. Municipalities are telling me they are tired of waiting, and part of the MGA review is actually where we get to sit down with municipalities, small and large, and actually lay out the rules that will make this possible.
Thank you, Mr. McIver. Mr. Lukaszuk.
Well, thank you. Rick, you're right. We have to get her done, but the fact is we have to make sure, because far too often we superimpose decisions as government onto municipalities and then find out that they haven't been heard. I'm hearing it loud and clear from municipalities that they don't believe that the issues that they're being challenged with are being addressed in the current draft versions of the MGA. I want to have the satisfaction as Premier that we are not solving a problem that they don't have. I want to hear from them. I want to make sure that their issues are addressed in the Act, because this Act will be governing the collaboration in this province for many years to come.
Thank you. We will now move on to our third prepared question. Thank you, candidates and audience, for bearing with this format as we move through. So for our third prepared question, this is with concern to mental health. Mental health is an increasingly relevant issue in our province, particularly for seniors, children, and post-secondary students. What will you do if you are elected as our Premier to ensure that Alberta has the best system in place to address mental health issues and ensure that mental health services are accessible to Albertans? Mr. Lukaszuk, you have 1 minute.
Well, thank you. You know, mental health illness is a medical condition that we as Albertans pay through many ministries, and many Albertans simply don't get to realize themselves and enjoy the quality of life that they could if those issues were properly addressed. Number one, providing wraparound services, identifying mental health illness, diagnosing mental health illness, and medicating mental health illness, and providing the wraparound support network that doesn't currently exist to the extent that it possibly could. Second of all, we need to work with federal government and some of the definitions of what constitutes a danger to themselves and others, so that we can intervene in cases and actually help individuals deal with their problems. It's a very multi-layered issue, but the fact is not only in Alberta but throughout Canada, we've been dropping the ball on this issue, and it costs those individuals and it costs us severely. Being proactive and working on the side of wellness and identifying those issues and educating ourselves, destigmatizing the issue of mental health illness is something that is very important because we see it all around us and we don't address it.
Thank you, Mr. Lukaszuk. Mr. McIver, 1 minute.
Well, thank you. And you know what? This is a real issue. I know I had a very close friend at one point in my life that committed suicide, and seen lots of other examples of how mental health is a real issue. And I have to tell you, as Premier, I will never tell you I know everything. And this is one place where I'm definitely not going to tell you I know everything. I will get advice from the best people in Alberta and outside if necessary, but we'll start in Alberta with the people that work with people in the mental health business. Find out where we need to go, find out what's missing and add it, find out what we're doing too much and take it away. This is an area where I will rely on advice from other people. I know it's important, but frankly, I've done a lot of things, and this is an area where I don't have a lot of expertise, but I'm a premier that will listen. And when I don't have the answers, I will find somebody that does, and I will use their expertise, because I think that's the way we best serve Albertans.
Thank you, Mr. McIver. Mr. Prentice, 1 minute.
Well, I agree that we need to have the best system in place to address mental health. I don't think any of us have all the answers. I think the key people are the frontline health workers who tell me that their concern is the allocation of resources, specifically the allocation of resources within the healthcare system, and whether or not adequate dollars within the system are being made available to the pressure that they're under, because there are some frightening statistics about as many as 10% of citizens having these kinds of challenges. Secondly, we need to work in partnership with philanthropic organizations or communities of faith. I was with Don Scott this summer. A lot of this ties to homelessness. Don and I attended a vigil in Fort McMurray. There were over 60 people who died on the streets of Fort McMurray over the last 10 years, a combination of homelessness and mental health problems. This isn't good enough. We have to do a better job, and this is a problem.
Thank you, Mr. Prentice. Our first pair for the face-off will be Mr. Prentice and Mr. McIver. Mr. Prentice, 30 seconds.
This is an issue for sure among seniors, young children, students. I was surprised when I visited the MD of Grasslands, community of Grasslands over the course of the campaign, and met first responders with the volunteer fire department who deal with a lot of the carnage that they've seen and the mental health problems that they have, because they are the first responders on accidents on Highway 63. So this is a challenge that we face as Albertans in a lot of unexpected ways, and we need to be sensitive to it and resources.
Thank you, Mr. Prentice. Mr. McIver.
Well, thanks for raising that, Jim. One of the things I have in my platform, which you can find on ricmciver.com, is my rural strategy. As I said, I actually would increase funding for rural volunteer fire departments and first responders. And the areas where it increased the funding for specifically was for safety equipment. And
I will remind candidates that this question is about mental health and not fire departments.
No, it is, and thank you for saying that. And the other part of that funding is with mental health, for when they do deal with PTSD after seeing horrendous things on the road. So I respectfully was on top of it. So I do accept how important this is, and have reflected that in my campaign, even though I admitted earlier I'm not an expert.
Thank you, Mr. McIver. Our next face-off will be Mr. McIver and Mr. Lukaszuk. Mr. McIver, 30 seconds.
And I will say this, I did spend during my time on City Council 3 years chairing the housing company. And I can tell you that mental illness certainly isn't the only contributing factor to people's homelessness, but it's one of them. And I will actually, I'm sorry, Thomas, I'm not going to fight you. I'm actually going to agree with you. You need wraparound services. You can't actually put somebody in a house that has other issues and hopefully they're going to do fine. If they need help, you need to get it for them. And we need to work together to do it. And we need to do it in consultation with the agencies.
Thank you, Mr. McIver. Mr. Lukaszuk.
Thank you. Yes, and you may know, Rick, I passed the legislation of presumptive post-traumatic stress disorder for our firefighters and all first responders, police officers, and paramedics. This is something that we really have to remove the stigma from. The fact is that it is very difficult to admit to having a mental health issue, and we need to create an atmosphere where Albertans get confident that if they come out and say, I have an issue, that we will wrap around them, provide them with the assistance that they deserve and that they need, and have the support network around them. This is not an issue that should be politicized in any way.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lukaszuk and Mr. Prentice, you will now face off. Mr. Lukaszuk, you have 30 seconds.
Well, thank you. As I said earlier, we see mental health illness in our workplaces, and when it's identified, we struggle. We don't know how to deal with this. Education is a number one priority. With children, early intervention and early diagnosis. That's why early kindergarten and early intervention programs are so important. But we must come to a point where we realize that having mental health illness is no different than having regular physical illness. It's an illness that needs to be diagnosed and addressed, and there's no shame
Thank you,
related
Mr.
to mental
Lukaszuk.
health illness.
Mr. Prentice, 30 seconds.
Well, certainly early diagnosis and removing the stigma is important, but when you talk to the psychiatrists and the psychologists who are the frontline workers in our healthcare system, they will tell you that the real issue by them is the allocation of resources and how we're going to make sure that in AHS, within that system, that the frontline workers who do the important work of dealing with these really difficult issues have resources allocated to them. That's going to take leadership. It's going to take a degree of leadership that we've not seen in this province to this point.
Thank you very much. That concludes our prepared questions. We will now move on to the audience questions that the awesome PCYA volunteers have been collecting for the last about 20 minutes. Just give me one moment. So our first question is from Andrea Stampine on Twitter. Legal Aid Alberta has laid off over half of its staff in the Calgary office. AISH clients no longer qualify for legal aid. What do you plan to do as the Premier of Alberta to improve access to justice for low-income Albertans? Our first initial response will be from Mr. McIver. You have 1 minute.
Again, if you go to ricmciver.com, you will find a piece of my policy where I said I would raise funding for legal aid to at least $1 more than the AISH minimum, simply because, and believe me, I don't pretend that's a perfect fix because it's not. But the person that sent the question in is right in saying that that's a disgrace, and I've said that I will make it so that those on AISH that have no other sources of income will qualify for legal aid. It's an important point. I think our Minister of Justice is right in saying we need to push the feds on this for some additional funding, but we can't, those citizens are Alberta citizens, and we need to look after the weakest amongst us. It is one of the marks of what type of a society they are, and it'll be a mark of the government that I lead.
Thank you very much, Mr. McIver. Mr. Prentice, you have 1 minute.
Well, it's a very important question. It's obviously been topical. Whoever's the Premier of Alberta has an obligation that they owe to all Albertans, and that includes the poorest in our society. It includes people that don't have access to services that are commonplace for the rest of us. And that certainly includes access to justice. We cannot have a prosperous society that we're proud of if we don't provide legal aid funding that's adequate for people who are indigent and who are in difficult circumstances. I've been very clear that we should increase the legal aid funding. I've been very clear that in terms of the difficult circumstances of AISH clients, that the level of funding needs to cover them. That needs to be set at a level that AISH clients are eligible for legal aid. And so we have a lot of work to do on this. I think it can be done fairly quickly. I don't pass it off to the federal government. If we get money from the federal government, great. But we have duties to our citizens, and the Premier of Alberta needs to stand up to that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prentice. And Mr. McIver. Or Mr. Lukaszuk, my apologies. You have 1 minute.
But you really want to hear from
Well, then I would need legal aid. Well, thank you very much. Well, the fact is that first of all, it's not only age, but we need to synchronize low income benefits and make sure that any person on low income benefits, whether it's senior on pension or a person on AISH or somebody in Alberta works, that they have access to a judicial recourse. So synchronization of benefits is important. And you know what? Ottawa has not been paying their share for legal aid, not only for the last year or two, but frankly for a very long period of time. So yes, we need to cover those costs up front, but we need to definitely voice our concerns with Ottawa and get a payback because that money is owed for a number of years.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lukaszuk. We will now move into the face-offs. Our first rebuttal session will be with Mr. McIver and Mr. Lukaszuk. Mr. McIver, you have 30 seconds, and as a brief reminder, the question was, what do you plan to do to improve access to justice for lower-income Albertans?
Well, as I said, I have it in my platform already to increase the legal aid funding. And the other thing is, too, I think we need to talk to those people that actually deliver legal aid. They might know a little bit about it. The centerpiece of my campaign is actually that 4.1 million Albertans will be the boss, and several of them are experts, and surely the ones that work in legal aid are experts in that area. So I intend to spend some time getting their advice and finding out where we can best act on that advice.
Thank you, Mr. McIver. Mr. Lukaszuk.
Well, thank you. This is a growing issue not only in Alberta but throughout Canada, and synchronizing benefits and making sure that once you qualify for one benefit, you actually qualify for all of them, as opposed to putting people who have very limited means of moving around from place to place to qualify separately for different benefits simply just makes no sense, makes their life even But the fact is that Madam Justice McLaughlin has identified that issue from Supreme Court of Canada to federal government a number of years ago. Yes, we need to backstop those costs, but we need to put our federal government of today and of previous years on the hot seat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lukaszuk. Ms. Lukaszuk and Mr. Prentice, you will now face off. Ms. Lukaszuk, 30 seconds.
Well, thank you, Jim. You know, you like to identify yourself as not being here in Alberta, not being part of any past of it, and I accept it. You were in Ontario most of the time, but this is one file that you can deal with because you were in the federal government and the cabinet that was shortchanging Alberta on legal aid and poor Albertans' access to justice. Perhaps if you affiliate yourself with federal government today, perhaps that is something that you would be able to help us address. Maybe not as a premier, but as a good Albertan who now is in Alberta.
Thank you, Mr. I will ask the audience to hold on to applause, please. Mr. Prentice, 30 seconds.
If I might just say to the Deputy Premier, all the time I was in the federal government, I never heard him stand up and ask for anything. Legal aid funding. So in terms of legal aid funding, which was the question, clearly we need additional funding. We also need to speed up in terms of the number of judges who are appointed. That's one thing that's limiting access to justice. And there also are some significant courthouse builds in this province where we've fallen behind. And that is also limiting access to justice in the province.
Thank you. Mr. Prentice and Mr. McIver, you will now face off. Mr. Prentice, 30 seconds.
I think we're in agreement that we need more legal aid funding. I think we're in agreement that it should be beyond the H income level. I do think, just coming back to the point I made just a moment ago, we have to deal with a number of pressing cases in the province where legal challenges are threatening against the government because we don't have courthouses. Not everybody can have exactly the courthouse they want, but we have to make sure that people have access to justice. And we can't be penny wise and pound foolish and start to jam up our system with difficulties, extra costs, because we're not funding it.
Mr. McIver.
Good. And Mr. Prentice, thank you for mentioning that you were in Ottawa and you are a lawyer, and clearly you didn't ask for legal funding for Alberta when you were there, or perhaps, or at least if you did, you weren't successful in getting it, because one of the places we are short is for funding from the federal government. So, and I don't know how you can call it successful when we're short getting it. So, you're fond of saying you weren't here. The question is, where were you?
Candidates will have an opportunity to address each other once again at the end in the tete-a-tete section. Thank you very much to the candidates for addressing the issue of legal aid and access to justice for low-income Albertans. We will now move on to our second audience question. This is from an anonymous individual in the audience this evening. As leader of the PC party, how do you see yourself engaging young Albertans and citizens as a whole with a government and party that has seen integrity and accountability be an issue across Canada? Each candidate has 1 minute opening statements, starting with Mr. Prentice.
Excellent question, and this is something I've spoken about over the course of the campaign. It's about the importance of restoring public trust, which is the real issue that we face going ahead. It's about the end of entitlements. It's the Accountability Act that I talked about today that we need to introduce as a new government. It involves the end of sweetheart contracts for political staffers, the end of sweetheart severance contracts. It involves the end of things such as sole source contracts. And I introduced the notion today that it should involve turnover in our political system, bringing new people, renewal in our political system, things like term limits. These will all form part of the Accountability Act. And ladies and gentlemen, that's exactly what Albertans are asking for right now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prentice. Mr. Lukaszuk, you have 1 minute.
Well, you know what? It starts right now. Promising integrity and saying once I become a premier, I'll act with integrity is different than actually showing it. Because integrity begins every morning when you get out of bed. And the fact is that we have to conduct ourselves in this campaign in a manner that we will be acting as a premier. Subverting democracy and putting term limits and bringing American political system to Canada is not the answer. Getting rid of politicians as great as Premier Lockheed, who would have been gone in half a term, and Prime Minister Harper would have never become a Prime Minister under the system, is not the answer. The fact is, either you have integrity or you don't. It doesn't matter how you legislate it. If you don't know it intuitively, and if you don't know what is right or wrong, it doesn't matter what rules are in place, you, sir, will find a loophole to get through them.
Thank you. Mr. McIver?
Well, I think we best engage young Albertans by setting a good example and encouraging them and showing that we aspire to higher ideals rather than settling for the lowest common denominator. I think we do it by accepting our own value as a party, and sometimes that value is $10 and not zero. And because you know what, you can buy memberships, but you can't buy trust, and young people know that, and they can see the difference. You know what? So I think through this way, show value in the political process. Show value that you should be able to demonstrate that you're doing good things for Albertans. The young people will respond to that. They have more future than I do. I'm going to be dead long before young people are. And they, you know what, they actually have a greater stake in the future, and I think by setting an example and encouraging them to involve themselves in PCYA, great example here tonight, but also by getting them involved in campaigning, door knocking, and helping. And I'm doing some of that in my campaign, and I'll continue to.
Thank you very much. We will now move into the face-offs. Mr. Lukaszuk and Mr. Prentice, you are first. Mr. Lukaszuk, you have 30 seconds.
Well, thank you very much. You know, to get the younger generation involved in politics, we have to show them that politics has integrity to it, and that we act with integrity. You know, talking about integrity and then delivering something totally opposite is just not the way. And you know what? Maybe we need to show our young people that Beatles, maybe after all, we're right. Money can't buy you love.
I can't believe, Mr. Lukaszuk, that you would suggest that an accountability act would subvert democracy. I can't believe you would suggest that. And when you talk about standing up and being counted, you'll have an opportunity to stand up and be counted, because eventually, as a result of the Auditor General's report, you're going to be sitting down with the RCMP and answering the question of why you were on the plane to Lethbridge with the former Premier in clear contravention of all of the rules of the government. So you will have a chance to speak about trust at that time.
Thank you, Mr. Prentice. Mr. Prentice and Mr. McIver, you are the next face-off. Mr. Prentice, 30 seconds. Mr. Prentice, 30 seconds.
Well, in terms of attracting young people to the party, I think it's important that we all reach out. I think it's important that we attract people in whatever way possible. I have reached out over the course of my campaign, bringing young people into the political process. I'll continue to do that in every way possible. I stand by the record of my campaign. It's very clear. I've been outspoken about the importance of the new generation of people, building on PCYA, but also bringing people from all over this province back into the political process. I'm a person who is bringing, through this process, many, many young people into the party.
Thank you, Mr. Prentice. Mr. McIver.
Well, again, I will continue to invite young people to work in my campaign, to go campaign, and to really to work on the higher ideals that all Albertans should aspire to, and I think young people naturally too. I think if you, and you know what, it comes down to doing things right for the betterment of Albertans and following the rules. And you know, young people understand, as well as anybody does, that just because it's not against the rules doesn't always mean it's right. And I think modeling that understanding is a way to build trust, particularly amongst young people, and invite them.
Thank you, Mr. McIver. Mr. Lukaszuk, you are the next face-off. I find the hockey references make this easy to understand. Mr. McIver, you have 30 seconds.
And you know what? And again, I will continue, Thomas, with young people. It's a matter of they understand intuitively that their future is more at stake. And I think the more we can involve them in working with government, starting in volunteer areas, and where there's jobs available, I think that is ways in which we can do it, and actually showing respect for new Albertans, young and old, getting them involved and helping connect them in a community, and actually getting young Albertans to do that in partnership with us. Community events, whether it's the spring cleanup or whatever it is a great way to get started.
Mr. McIver, you have 30 seconds.
And young people are not looking forward to seeing us scrap all the time, but what they're looking for in a campaign is innovative ideas. And that is what I focused in this campaign on, bringing fresh ideas, fresh solutions to some old and some new problems. And young people want to get engaged in that. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for politicians that inspire them, that have fresh outlooks on life, and have a vision for tomorrow in Alberta. That's how I plan on engaging our youth, and that's what I always have been doing while in or out of government.
Thank you very much, candidates. That concludes our question on engaging young Albertans. We will now move on to our next question from the audience. This is from Wellness Alberta via Twitter. Healthcare now consumes 45% of the provincial budget. As Premier, how would you reduce demands on healthcare? We'll begin with opening statements from Mr. Lukaszuk. You have 1 minute.
Well, thank you. First of all, last thing Albertans want us to do right now is to restructure the corporation at the top. I don't know whether we have landed on the perfect structure, but I can tell you one thing. Our energy right now will be better spent addressing the real issues on the front lines. And it's just amazing what you can learn when you spend a few minutes with frontline workers and figure out how you get ambulances out of emergency base, how you get individuals to go to a 24-hour walk-in clinic as opposed to plugging up on emergency ward at night. We need to focus on real solutions to real problems and not corporate restructuring. But we also have to focus on wellness, because we know that the decisions we make tomorrow are not just for today, but they're for 20, 30 years down the road. We have to make sure that we focus on wellness and that we put policies and funding in place for preventative measures. And one of the things that I would instantly do is pass a bill that passed the legislature proclaimed the flavored tobacco act. That is the way you save dollars later. We've been elected to make decisions for today, but also proactive decisions for
Thank you
tomorrow.
very much, Mr. Lukaszuk. Mr. McIver.
Well, thank you. And you know what? My municipal experience has taught me that municipalities set land use policies, and they can have a tremendous effect on health. For example, building communities where you can walk to get a loaf of bread or a jug of milk. Building communities where if you want to, you can choose to live, work, and play in an area that you could ride your bike and walk rather than take a car every time. And I can tell you, if you look at the communities that developed when I was on City Council in Calgary, there's some of the best examples of exactly that. And we need to continue to work with the other municipalities to do that. We also need to listen to those in the health care system and connect them to the decision makers, not by adding a super board, but by rather bringing the frontline workers closer to the decision makers so they can tell us where the problems are. And once you understand where the problems are, what brings people into the healthcare system, then you can actually arrive at solutions on keeping them out. The best way to treat people with healthcare is to not treat them at all, is to keep them healthy.
Thank you very much. Mr. Prentice.
Well, in terms of wellness and healthcare, clearly an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so wellness needs to be a very clear priority in terms of our healthcare system and the administration of our healthcare resources. The key to this is the frontline workers. It's the nurses and the doctors who can have a significant effect with our citizens if they coach them in wellness and if they work with them in achieving wellness as a lifestyle objective. And so what needs to happen in our healthcare system is a focus, working together in partnership with the frontline workers to make sure that we're focused on wellness. I talk to frontline workers all the time. They tell me what they want to see is more direct decision making. They want to see more resources. They want to see an elimination of many of the layers of bureaucracy that they face in trying to get their job done and help Albertans hour to hour and day to day. So that needs to be the focus of any changes that we make in the system. If that needs governance changes, we will make those governance changes also.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prentice. We will now move into our face-offs. The question once again was, as Premier, how would you reduce demands on the healthcare system in Alberta? Our first face-off is Mr. Prentice and Mr. McIver. Mr. Prentice, 30 seconds.
Well, I remember many years ago when I started in public life, and the healthcare bill was consuming 50% of the resources of the small provinces, and people said this is not sustainable. We're now getting to the point where provinces such as Alberta, it's at 45% and increasing, and it surely is not sustainable. We're going to need some significant changes in terms of how AHS operates, because we have to be able to have a focus on wellness, reduce the dependency on expensive care, and that is going to be a priority because that's what we can afford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prentice. Mr. McIver.
Well, Jim, you know what? In order to make these changes, I think you have to have some perspective on what's going on there. And frankly, you can't get that perspective from being in the stands. You have to be on the ice and play in the game. And I think if you're looking for someone to lead this process for government, you actually need someone that's been on the ice, sometimes scoring hat tricks, sometimes scoring in your own net, but nonetheless, learning what's going on and seeing what needs to change. And I would suggest to you that I offer that perspective.
Thank you. Mr. McIver and Mr. Lukaszuk, you will be next. Mr. McIver, 30 seconds.
Again, you know what? It's a big animal. You have to do it from being on the ice and playing the game. And again, Thomas, I would say to you that working with municipalities and outside agencies, not just the municipalities, but other people that deliver wellness. I think we need to do that, and I think we need to do it with, again, all agencies, faith groups, community groups, and in fact, in my policy is after we get the budget balance, is a tax credit to get kids in sports, which I think will keep them out of the healthcare system.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. No, I would agree with you on this one, and maybe even to supplement your comments about being in the stands, you also don't change fundamentally the system, because we've seen how it doesn't work by putting more of your corporate bodies onto a corporate board of AHS, or by committing your time actually in sitting on boards for private, for-profit healthcare. You have to show a commitment that you are a supporter of a publicly funded, accessible healthcare system, and the best way to determine that is your past track record, and not sitting on for-profit clinics, boards of governors. That would be one way to start.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lukaszuk and Mr. Prentice, you're next. I will remind the candidates to please address the questions specifically and not generally. Mr. Lukaszuk, 30 seconds.
Well, thank you. You know, the fact is that Albertans value our publicly funded healthcare system and access to it. Are there issues? Yes. Those issues are on the front lines, and we need to focus on the front lines. Solving it by appointing friends to boards is not the answer, and frankly, I will tell you, the best way to show commitment is through your past record. And sitting on for-profit clinics as a board member is definitely a way of showing how one is not committed to publicly funded and university accessible healthcare system.
Thank you, Mr. Prentice.
Well, I'm completely committed to a publicly funded healthcare system, but you know, the real question in Alberta right now is everywhere you travel in the province, people are asking why they don't have a say in their healthcare system, why they don't have a say in terms of how local services are delivered. You were the deputy premier through this period. Everywhere you go in rural Alberta people are incredibly upset. They don't have a say in terms of how their hospitals are operating. They don't have, it has nothing to do with buddies. This has to do with standing up and being counted for Albertans and speaking your mind and doing what's right. That's what it's about.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prentice. And that concludes our debate on questions about healthcare in Alberta. Our final audience question is from another anonymous audience member here. Access to affordable and quality post-secondary education is a high priority for many young Albertans, including myself. As Premier, what will you do to ensure that Alberta students are well supported to pursue higher education and that Alberta has an innovative and inclusive post-secondary system? We will start with our opening statements. Mr. McIver, you have 1 minute.
Well, thank you. And I would say I would work with the post-secondary institutions and make sure that they are delivering the programs that young people are needing. We know, for example, there's 96,000 jobs going to go wanting, and we need to make sure those are getting delivered. And that's the reason that's important in getting accessible post-secondary is because if young people have to spend some money to do that, we want to make sure they get a job that they can pay it back. That's kind of important because then they need to start putting money away for themselves for the rest of their life. The other thing I think we need to do is continue with some of the grant programs, these student loan programs, and make sure students are supported. You know what? In fairness, we can't do it for everybody, but we certainly need to be sensitive of who we need to help and who is the most needed. Particularly if you have exceptional students that need assistance, I think we need to make sure that they get that opportunity because you shouldn't be held back in this great province simply because of money. There's no perfect answer, but we need to work on it together.
Thank you very much, Mr. McIver. Mr. Prentice, you have 1 minute.
Well, I have strong views about this. I was raised in a coal mining family that believed passionately in education, and so our post-secondary institutions, but also our students need to have certainty of funding, stable funding as we go forward. Otherwise, universities and colleges can't plan world-class institutions, and our students won't get access to quality education. You know, an excellent idea that was put forward by PC Youth, it was a PCYA resolution, marries together this need with the need in remote parts of our province to get students such as doctors through the Alberta system and into our remote communities where we need them. And one of the ideas that the PC Youth has put forward, which I applaud, was that if young graduates agree to go to Northern Alberta and serve, for example, in First Nation communities, then there needs to be some part of their term of service that involves the repayment of their loan and perhaps even the forgiveness of part of the loan as part of their structure of employment. I think it's a great idea.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lukaszuk, 1 minute.
Well, thank you so much. The first thing I would definitely not do is implement market modifiers, allowing our universities to increase tuition in certain faculties to up to 50%. Simply unacceptable to do such a thing to our students. One of the major costs for our students is not tuition, but actually the necessity to move out of rural or small-town Alberta to large municipalities. And yet we can bring education to our young people, as opposed to young people to education, by simply incentivizing collaboration within Campus Alberta, making sure that small colleges can deliver many of the programs from larger institutions in larger cities. And also changing our funding formulas that actually reward post-secondary institutions within Campus Alberta in collaborating, sharing costs, cross-delivering programs, and allowing students to transfer their credits from institution to institution when they choose to move or continue building on their educational credentials.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lukaszuk. So our first face-off here will be between Mr. McIver and Mr. Lukaszuk. Once again, I will remind audience members and our candidates that the question is, as Premier, what will you do to ensure that Alberta students are well supported to pursue higher education, and that Alberta has an inclusive and innovative post-secondary system? Mr. McIver, 30 seconds.
Well, thank you, Thomas. I'd be interested, do you agree? I'm pretty sure you agree, and you actually had something to do with it. The fact that one of the ways that we can make it more accessible is by letting people get part of the post-secondary while they're in high school, get the first or second year of an apprenticeship, for example. And I also would like to say, do you agree with the policy that I have at ricmciver.com to expand rural broadband? So you actually can, people in rural Alberta that don't have high-speed broadband now can actually get their education online if they choose to do that. It's not only a great economic development thing, I think it's a great
Thank you, Mr.
education tool.
McIver. Mr. Lukaszuk?
Well, thank you. Any way we can deliver education to students and lower their costs is the right thing to do. The fact is that moving to a large municipality, having to rent an apartment and live away from home, that's where the real costs are. With cost of tuition, we can deal with through bursaries and through student loans and other programs. But the last thing we can allow is our institutions to apply to a minister for 52% tuition increase just because the university figures that someone is going to make a lot of money upon graduation. That's unacceptable. Education should be accessible to poor as much as it is to the rich.
Thank you. Next face-off will be between Mr. Lukaszuk and Mr. Prentice. Mr. Lukaszuk, once again, 30 seconds.
Well, thank you. You know, I had the unfortunate displeasure of having to deliver a budget, being appointed to a cabinet position when the budget was already printed. And the first thing I did is I froze students' tuition to protect students from increased costs. Our province's future is based on education. If we are to diversify our economy, if we are to grow economically, that will come from our colleges and universities. And obviously it has to be a priority, but we can't promise money to everybody all the time. I know some will, but the fact is it has to be our priority, and we have to work with those institutions.
Thank you, Mr. Lukaszuk. Mr. Prentice, 30 seconds.
Well, we can't promise everything to everybody all the time, but when you're at a cabinet table, choices are made, and you have the ability to stand up and be counted. That's how cabinet works. I know because I've spent a lot of my life in cabinet setting. What we need are good institutions. First and foremost, we need world-class post-secondary institutions in Alberta that are self-governing. Secondly, we need adequate student funding system of scholarships and bursaries and student loans. We need all of that. We need students to make their own choices. I believe in free enterprise. I'm a conservative. People need to make their own choices, but we need a strong system within which they do that.
Thank you very much. Our next face-off will be between Mr. Prentice and Mr. McIver. Mr. Prentice, once again, 30 seconds.
Well, carrying on that theme, I think one of the interesting questions is whether or not, given that universities and colleges receive some degree of public funding, they should be incentivized to produce students, to make student options available that meet with market needs. I know, for example, this spring, I went to a high school graduation with my nieces. Everyone there wanted to be a power engineer. The next thing I read in the newspaper, kids were sleeping in the hallways to qualify for power engineering at Maiden State. It seems to me we can increase by funding.
Thank you very much,
availability.
Mr. Prentice. Mr. McIver, 30 seconds.
Well, you'll be happy to know that after you left the federal government, actually, complete coincidence as far as I know, on the same day that I announced additional funding for my intention to support rural broadband to help with this, the federal government actually announced a program too. So I intend to work as Premier in partnership with the federal government to deliver their program with ours so that we don't have duplication, we have as much coordination as possible and get the maximum benefit because they're all taxpayers' dollars, the taxpayers have to benefit.
Thank you very much, candidates, for addressing the topic of post-secondary education. That now concludes our audience and our prepared questions. We will now move on to a short tete-a-tete section where candidates will have 30 seconds to ask one question of an opponent of their choice, who will have 1 minute then to respond. The interrogating candidate will then have 1 minute to respond or continue that question, and their opponent will then have 1 minute again to respond. This section has been put in place so that candidates can address their colleagues if they have not yet had a chance to, and ask questions which we may not have addressed previously. So the first person to ask questions by way of our rotating system from the last question is Mr. Prentice. Mr. Prentice, you have 30 seconds to ask a question of either of your opponents, who will then have 1 minute to reply to you, and then you will have another 1 minute to reply to them. And you must stay with the same pairing. You can't ask questions of both of your opponents, only one.
Well, my question is Mr. Lukaszuk, and is that he was the Deputy Premier of Alberta from May of 2012 to December of 2013. He's recently expressed disgust about the use of government airplanes. Why did you not stand up and say something about this? You did not stand up in 2012, you did not stand up in 2013, you did not speak up until it was opportune to do so in his leadership race in 2014.
Thank you very much, Mr. McIver. Mr. Lukaszuk, you now have 1
Jim,
minute.
since you weren't here for your benefit, Jim, I did stand up, and because I stood up, as you may know, or you may have read it somewhere in Ontario, I was actually demoted from the position of Deputy Premier and was given the walk of shame from the 4th floor to the basement of the legislature. Jim, you may have read that I was the first one to say that this government has lost the moral authority to govern because of some of the issues that I wasn't very happy with. Jim, I can tell you one thing. I was with this government through the thick and thin. I was in this government when we had some great times, when I'm sure you would like to affiliate yourself with during Premier Klein years, and I was with this government when things were not going so well. And that's what integrity is all about. Everybody has friends when things are going well, and lack of success is the biggest orphan. Well, you know what? I am proud of this party. I am proud of this government. And the fact is things went wrong, and I did have the integrity. I didn't have to read it anywhere in a rule book. I did have the integrity to stand up and say no, and I paid the consequence for it, and I would do this again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prentice. You will have 1 minute, and then Mr. Lukaszuk, you will have another.
Well, it isn't really about the walk of shame, is it? It's about the shame of silence. It's about the fact that something was going on which is now under criminal investigation, and you didn't speak up. You didn't speak up, not a question of days or hours. You didn't speak up for 2.5 years. You didn't say anything. You didn't say boo about this. You were on the plane to Lethbridge, which is now under investigation by the authorities, criminal investigation about whether this was an abuse of trust or not. You were on the airplane. You sat on the airplane with the Premier because you were the Deputy Premier. You were there for 2 hours. You didn't say boo. You didn't say this was wrong. You didn't stand up, and Albertans want an answer.
Thank you, Mr. Lukaszuk. This is your final minute of this question.
Okay, integrity is actually telling the truth when you know the truth. And you know damn well, because the records already have been shown, that I wasn't on that plane. Actually, when that plane was in the air, I was having a meeting with the mayor of Medicine Hat, and then I was in Southwood with our Canadian and British soldiers. My concern also is with that flight, because if, God forbid, that flight was to crash, my wife and kids would have received a call that I perished in that crash, and I was 500-600 kilometers away from that. You know it, the records show it, and that is exactly what integrity is all about. You should know what is the right thing to say, and you should know what is right or wrong. And misinterpreting facts and making allegations which simply are based on fantasy is not what we want to see in our Premier's office. We've seen that movie before, and I don't think Albertans want that movie to be replayed yet one more time.
Thank you very much. Our next candidate for questions by way of our rotation here is Mr. Lukaszuk. Mr. Lukaszuk, you may pick one of your opponents, ask them a question, and we will continue in the same format that we did for this previous section. Mr. Lukaszuk, you have 30 seconds.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Prentice, I guess I owe you a favor. You have shown us that you believe that buying votes is quote-unquote fertilizer. What an ironic choice of words. Fertilizer for democracy. Today you have indicated that actually adopting an American government system which defies not only Canadian charter, but defies several hundred years of British parliamentary democracy, which practically couldn't work because we know that we have votes of confidence that you want to adopt such a system. And you have also indicated that you want to have longer
Mr.
cool-off
Lukaszuk, we're
periods.
going to need a question, please, for Mr. Prentice to respond to.
And you also want a cool-off
Sir?
period. Yes, well, that's the question. Which you did not.
No,
cool-off
Mr. Lukaszuk,
yourself.
we need a question
How
for
do
Mr.
you
Prentice.
how do you reconcile all that?
Going with the question, how do you reconcile all that? Mr. Prentice, you have 1 minute.
Mr. Prentice reconciles all that by believing that we need an accountability act in this province. This is the fundamental issue of this campaign. It will be the fundamental issue of the new government. It needs to address all of the concerns that people have raised in this province about things such as sole source contracts, about the lobby system that we have, about rules that allow people to work for the government, get terminated, receive payments, start work for the government in a different capacity. It involves things like term limits because people want to see some changes in their political system. They're tired of what they've seen. They want good government. They want somebody to stand up and say it's time for some changes. That's what they want.
Thank you, Mr. Lukaszuk. You now have 1 minute.
That is rather ironic for a candidate who has surrounded himself on this campaign with every single consultant in this province. If you ever need one, there aren't any available right now. And also, who never applied the cool-off period to himself, but the moment he walked out of cabinet, went straight into a multi-million-dollar position with a banking institution. So I guess the rules of accountability will be, don't do what I did, but I have a new set for you that will apply from now on. Is that the case?
Mr. Prentice, 1 minute, and this is our final minute for this question.
Well, firstly, anything I've done in my career since I left public life has been cleared through the federal ethics officer and has been approved. But we're still back really to the question about Albertans want to know why you didn't speak up as deputy premier. When there was an airplane flight to Grand Prairie that was in the news, everybody knew about it. Why did you not take the opportunity to stand up for 2.5 years?
This is the time for statements and not questions. Mr. Prentice, continue.
I think that's the fundamental question. In terms of the Canadian Charter and parliamentary democracy, there's nothing in the Charter that prohibits term limits. It is quite possible to structure legislation, Accountability Act. It's also possible to have a policy of our party, that encourages renewal and innovation in the political system and brings new people, young people into political life.
Thank you very much, candidates. Mr. McIver, now is your opportunity. You have 30 seconds to ask one question of one of your opponents.
Well, Mr. Prentice, you said that you checked with the party about giving away memberships. And then a member of your campaign team, your appointed spokesperson, said at one point that you had, quote, no knowledge of giving away free memberships, and shortly thereafter you threw him under the bus and disagreed with him. So my question is, did you give that person permission and an order to make that statement?
Well, no, I didn't. And as soon as I saw that the statement had been made, I made it very clear in a full session with the editorial board, actually, of the Sun newspaper chain. I was completely upfront about how these campaigns work. And, this is what honesty looks like. I was very clear. Some people have said, okay, it would be better if nobody spoke about this kind of thing. I am following all of the party's rules. I'm following all of the rules relative to financial disclosure.
Well, I'm glad you said it's better that nobody spoke about this, because the next question comes to, and in fact, through this whole campaign, we've heard not very much from you and from your spokespeople. And now you've thrown the spokespeople under the bus. So now Albertans are left having heard next to nothing about you, and you want to be the leader. So my question is, what are you going to do? I mean, you've actually made comments about speaking up, though I have spoken up, and Thomas says he has. When are you actually going to start talking to Albertans? The campaign is almost over.
This is the final minute for this question.
I have spoken up. I put out the first and most comprehensive platform. I have been speaking across this province about 5 priorities: fiscal responsibility, restoring public trust, accessing global markets, global prices for our commodities, dealing with being a leader again on the environment, issues about the quality of life, our education system, post-secondary education system, healthcare, seniors, and our quality of infrastructure. I am on the record on all of these. Before either of you two went out publicly and said much of anything, I have put a full platform in front of Albertans, which tells them exactly what I believe and exactly where we need to take this province. And as I've found out, crisscrossing this province, I've been in every corner of Alberta. The priorities that I've been speaking about are the priorities of Albertans and their residents. It's what they want. They want good government in all those areas.
Thank you very much, audience. I know we're excited, but the debate is almost concluded and we can save applause until then. All right, so before we move into closing statements, we have one last question for our candidates. The gloves came off tonight, especially in this tete-a-tete you just saw, and you all had a chance to question the other candidates and defend your positions. However, at the end of the day, you are all here because you want to lead the province, and regardless of who wins, you will be working together. So, for our final question, each of you has 1 minute to tell us one thing that you admire most about each of your opponents. Mr. Lukaszuk, you have 1 minute to tell us what you admire most about Mr. McIver and Mr. Prentice.
Well, I do admire Mr. Prentice's ability to redefine what we normally customarily understand as being true.
I will ask the candidates to keep these comments respectful. This is meant as a positive portion of our debate, please.
Because it takes a great deal of skillsmanship.
Mr. Lukaszuk, I'm going to ask you to make us a positive statement about both.
Well, it is. Just let me. He will love it at the end. But the fact is this, all of us are working our behinds off in this campaign. There's no doubt about it. We bump into each other in different places throughout the province. And at the end of this, we will make sure that our PC party prevails in 2016.
Please address Mr. Prentice and Mr. McIver.
Where's the law?
Mr. Lukaszuk, were you going to address Mr. Prentice and Mr. McIver?
Yes,
what do you admire about them?
There you go. So first of all, I do want to thank you for your commitment to our party, because this is a party that all of us in this room firmly believe in. And I know everybody has a different approach to it, but at the end of the day, the commitment that you've shown, and being with or without family, being on the road, I know I have 2 little girls that I'm leaving at home every night. It costs a lot of personal time, and for that, both of you, I really admire you, because it takes a special person to do it. And,
thank you very much, Mr. Lukaszuk. Your time is up about 30 seconds ago. Mr. McIver, you have 1 minute to address what you admire most genuinely about your opponents, Mr. Lukaszuk and Mr. Prentice.
Well, it's not very nice to be jealous, but I'm jealous of both of your hair, I have to tell you. and you can see why. And I'll also say that I do admire commitment to public service. Whether you're trying to become Prime Minister or Premier or whatever you're trying to become, it's something that matters. And I genuinely admire the personal effort and commitment that takes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both for having served the public.
Thank you very much. Mr. Prentice, 2 things you admire about your opponents.
Firstly, my friend Mr. McIver, he's used his hockey analogies tonight, and I'm no hockey player, so I think he shares my belief in what Gordie Howe called the Gordie Howe hat trick, which was a goal, an assist, and a fight. In terms of Thomas Lukaszuk, I obviously admire his hair, but I also admire his commitment to his family. And I personally come from a coal mining family, and I wasn't given any particular advantages, and I know Thomas comes from the same kind of background, and so I admire his stick-to-itiveness as somebody who's doing exactly that.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, candidates. We will now move into our closing statements. The order for these closing statements was decided by each campaign team before everyone arrived here this evening. You will each have 2 minutes to give your final debates or statements for tonight, starting with Mr. McIver and then Mr. Prentice and closing with Mr. Lukaszuk. Mr. McIver, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you all for being here. This is about trust. This is about who's going to lead this province, and this is about who's going to change the channel on the bad things and who's going to keep supporting the good things. And I will say to you, money can't buy memberships, or can buy memberships, but they can't buy trust. And it's something that I think resonates with Albertans. and something that we as a group need to bring together and do that. I will say this, term limits. Really? I believe in democracy. Albertans should decide who sits in the legislature. We should report to Albertans. We shouldn't tell them who they can elect and who they can't. If Albertans want to keep somebody, so one person shouldn't be telling them they can't. And of course, they do get an opportunity at the same time to throw us all out if they decide to, or throw the opposition out. So really, I don't see that as democratic at all. It's about a track record. I don't have $20,000 flights or $40,000 flights over to Europe on my track record when $20,000 commercial flight was available. I have a track record of boarding expense accounts, a track record of spending less in my constituency office than I could, a track record of speaking up for taxpayers when the Sky Palace was going to go forward. These, I think, are the standards that Albertans are looking for, and ones that I've consistently tried to offer. And I will say there's been quite a debate here over the course of the evening, and this may get me a big applause at the end, it might get me none at all, about who's the insider and who's the outsider. Well, the fact is, one candidate has all the MLAs and the party insiders gathered around him, and Mr. Prentice, congratulations for that. But you're the insider. There's really no argument about it. You can actually tell by the applause here tonight. And Thomas, you've been around 17 years. And that doesn't make you a bad person, but you're also an insider. I've been around just 2.5 years, just long enough to have done my apprenticeship. I don't need to look to where the bathrooms are when I get elected. I can get to work right away, and I can get to work with a track record with no baggage. Please vote for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prentice, 2 minutes.
Well, our party is full of really great people who are dedicated to the future of the province. I joined this party 40 years ago when I was the age of many of the young people here. I was drawn to the party by the vision of Peter Lougheed and the vision of Alberta that he espoused. And so I'm excited about the future. Throughout the summer, I've seen a new generation of Albertans who want to have an impact, who are joining campaigns, who are taking part. Young people. Our campaign is staffed top to bottom with new, bright, young people who care about the future of Alberta. You know, Albertans have entrusted us with the government of this province for a long time for one fundamental reason, and that is that we have been the party of good government. You know, a party for all Albertans, a party that respected their property rights, a party that was accountable, but that has not been the case in recent years, and that is the issue in front of all of us as Albertans. We need new leadership, and we need a new start. Albertans will simply not accept more of the same. Now, I've been traveling, from one end of the province to the other, listening to the concerns of Albertans over the course of the summer. It's been a moving experience. I've been able to put my jeans and my cowboy boots on and get around the province and speak about what I have thought are the priorities. The priorities that I speak about resonate with Albertans because they don't come from the cabinet. They don't come from the caucus. They come from me and from Albertans who I've spoken to, who are taxpaying Albertans who have been disappointed. And so I'm asking you tonight really to join with me. It's going to take a lot of hard work. I'm asking for you to, if I'm successful in this campaign, for you to be at my side. It's going to take all of your energy. It's going to take all of our ideas, and it's going to take a lot of backbreaking work from every single person who's here. We're going to get this party back on track. We're going to get this province back on track. We're going to fulfill the promise of Alberta. And so let's work together and take our party back. Thank you.
Mr. Lukaszuk, you have 2 minutes for your closing statements.
Well, I spent a good part of my childhood trying to fight my way from behind an iron curtain. I can tell you, I will be a premier that will not be building iron curtains around the premier's office. I will be a premier that will be available to you and will speak to you directly. I will be a premier that will not need rules or regulations to simply know intuitively what is right or wrong. Albertans have been put through a lot over the last number of months, and they expect a government with a leadership where they know when they go to sleep at night, their premier will make the right decisions for them. I have a vision for this province. I'm very proud of this province. This province has been very good to me and my family. And I know that we can be, frankly, anything we want to be. We have been given that gift to us by previous governments and by nature. You will see a premier that takes responsibility for the mistakes that have been made and will face you, the electorate, in due course. You will see a premier that is committed to the party through the thick and thin and will not abandon you just because things have gone wrong for a while. I have the experience of 13 years, not 17, but 13 years, but I still have the burning in my belly. I would be honored and thrilled to be your premier, to bring integrity and experience at the same to our government. We are a party that has worked together very hard, and I know that we are the only party that has the values and the policies that are truly reflective of average Albertans. This is not a party that favors only those who are in corner offices. This is a party for all Albertans. That is why we always have been very successful. I believe that I can be your premier and make you really proud in 2016 when we will win the next government through integrity and doing what we're saying and saying what we're doing.
So, this concludes our evening debate. I would like to thank Mr. McIver, Mr. Lukaszuk, and Mr. Prentice for coming out tonight. Regardless of who is elected as the next leader of Alberta's Progressive Conservatives and the premier of our province, you have all demonstrated a very clear, deep, and inspiring passion for Alberta. I thank all of you for that. Also, thank you to the PCYA for organizing this, for your hard work you put into it, and for allowing me to moderate. Before we all leave here tonight, I want to remind everyone that in order to vote in the upcoming election, you must have a PC Alberta membership, which you can get online. And then I would encourage everyone to vote on election day, because the more people who participate in the democratic process, the better, and this will be the this will be the party leading our province. Thank you very much once again, candidates.